January 26, 2011, Philadelphia. A winter storm had begun rolling across the city. Schools closed early. Ellen Greenberg, a 27-year-old first-grade teacher, sent a text to her fiancé, Sam Goldberg, saying she was leaving work. Surveillance footage later confirmed she arrived at their sixth-floor apartment around 5:30 p.m., alone. Once inside, she made a fruit salad. She changed into her gray sweatshirt and sweatpants. Her last known action? Sending a short, casual text to her mom. Then, silence. Sam left for the gym around the same time Ellen arrived home. When he returned a little over half an hour later, he found the apartment door locked with the swing bar still latched from the inside. He tried calling, then texting, then pounding on the door. No answer. He texted her, "Hello, open the door. You better have an excuse. I'm getting pissed." Then came his final message moments before calling building security, "You have no idea." He eventually broke through the door with the help of building staff. What he found inside was something no one should ever see. Ellen was on the kitchen floor, slumped against the lower cabinets, seated upright. A 10-inch serrated knife was still embedded deep in her chest. There were 20 stab wounds total, 10 of them to the back of her neck and head, others in her stomach and abdomen. Some wounds had punctured her lungs. One struck her heart. There were no defensive wounds, no signs of forced entry, no blood trail, no note, no explanation. The scene was shocking. But stranger still was how quickly the official narrative began to shift. Philadelphia detectives initially treated it as a homicide. The medical examiner even labeled it that way in her first report. But within just a few days, before all forensic testing was complete, the ruling was quietly changed. The cause of death: suicide. No explanation was given to the family. No detailed rationale was released, just a stunning reversal that left them in disbelief. The autopsy only deepened the mystery. Ellen had multiple deep stab wounds to her chest, stomach, back, and even the base of her skull. Some punctured muscle, others pierced vital organs. At least one went through her cranial bone, a location that would be both difficult and excruciating to reach by one's own hand. But what stood out most was one specific detail: a wound that showed no hemorrhaging. That meant it had been inflicted after Ellen's heart had stopped beating, a post-mortem wound. Experts later confirmed this. One pathologist described it as physically impossible to self-inflict post-mortem. This finding alone should have cast doubt on the suicide theory. Yet, the ruling stood. Official explanations centered around the apartment door being locked from the inside. Investigators suggested that Ellen, alone in the apartment, must have done this to herself. But forensic experts, some hired by the family, others independent, began asking hard questions. Could someone stab themselves 20 times, including 10 times in the back of the head, and still have the coordination to embed a knife into their own chest? Could a person really inflict those injuries without hesitation marks, defensive wounds, or signs of distress? And if one of the wounds was post-mortem, how could it possibly be self-inflicted? The family was never given a clear answer. Instead, a disturbing pattern emerged. The police stopped treating the case as a homicide. The medical examiner changed the cause of death, and the case was effectively closed. Even after repeated requests for a full review, the authorities remained firm. They believed it was suicide. Despite the forensic evidence, despite the lack of motive, and despite the fact that not a single expert could explain how Ellen could have physically done this to herself. Her parents, Sandy and Josh Greenberg, were left not only grieving their daughter, but fighting a system that refused to reconsider what was plainly in front of them. As months turned into years, the Greenberg family uncovered a disturbing lack of transparency, and even more disturbing inconsistencies. First, the medical examiner never offered a formal explanation for changing Ellen's manner of death from homicide to suicide. Not in reports, not in sworn testimony. No clear rationale was ever given, just a quiet shift in paperwork. Then came the forensics. The knife, the single piece of direct evidence found in Ellen's chest, had no usable fingerprints. None from Ellen, none from anyone else. Surveillance footage from the hallway was never released. It's unclear whether it was reviewed in full or even preserved. The knife wounds varied in angle, depth, and location, leading some experts to suggest they may have been made with more than one blade. Yet only a single knife was recovered from the scene. These weren't just anomalies. They were red flags. Even the city's own forensic consultant, brought in years later, conceded under oath that some of Ellen's injuries didn't align with the typical suicide profile. Her lack of hesitation wounds, multiple deep stabs to the back of her head, and a post-mortem wound created a forensic picture that simply didn't add up. Frustrated by the inaction and silence, the Greenbergs filed a civil lawsuit against the Philadelphia Medical Examiner's Office. Their allegation that the office had succumbed to outside pressure, possibly from law enforcement, to avoid opening a full-blown murder investigation. Whether due to politics, liability, or public image, someone, they believed, had made the case disappear, but the court never ruled on the facts. In 2022, the Commonwealth Court of Pennsylvania dismissed the lawsuit, not because it lacked merit, but because the Greenbergs were said to lack standing. In legal terms, they weren't considered damaged in the way the law defines harm. So, despite overwhelming evidence, the case was thrown out. That could have been the end. But then came a twist. In early 2024, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court made a decision that changed everything. It agreed to hear the Greenbergs' appeal. But the court wasn't ruling on whether Ellen was murdered. Instead, it would decide something just as important. Do families have the legal right to challenge a cause of death ruling when overwhelming evidence suggests it may be wrong? If the court sides with the Greenbergs, it could open the door for a full reinvestigation, not only of Ellen's case, but of any case where the official cause of death is in doubt. Due to conflicts with the Philadelphia District Attorney's Office and Attorney General, the case was reassigned to the Chester County DA, an outside office. That means, for the first time, independent eyes could review the evidence with no political ties to the original investigation. In a statement to the press, Ellen's father, Josh Greenberg, reflected the weight of what was at stake. If we're not going to use the word justice, we'll use the word undecided or homicide, because that's what this is. It's not just about changing a certificate. It's about restoring truth and accountability, and finally bringing light to a case that has lived in the shadows for 13 years. This isn't just about one family's tragedy. It's about trust in the medical system, in law enforcement, and in the people who are supposed to tell the truth when someone dies. What happens when evidence contradicts an official narrative? What happens when those in power decide to look the other way? Over 160,000 people have signed a petition demanding justice for Ellen Greenberg, and her case has become a rallying cry for victims' families across the country. If her parents succeed, this case could set a legal precedent for challenging questionable rulings, not just in Pennsylvania, but nationwide. Ellen Greenberg was supposed to be planning a wedding, not a funeral, but what her family has given her is something else. A fight that never stopped, a voice that kept asking questions, and a story that's not over yet, because the truth doesn't vanish. It waits, and one day, it speaks. Subscribe to Unlocked Confidential for more real-life investigations, legal twists, and the stories that refuse to stay buried.